So this is Buttons. He's a beloved childhood toy I was given in the 70s as a child. 20 years later, I met one of my best friends, Boris the chimpanzee, and this is us playing chase at Chester Zoo, which he loves to do whenever I visit on my own or with my family or with my animal psychology students. Boris has an amazing story, and he's become quite the TV star now since appearing on The Secret Life of the Zoo. But Boris was caught in the wild, which means his whole family would likely have been killed trying to defend him against hunters and pet traders. He ended up in a New York pet shop where a lady bought him, and he spent his first 3 years in a Manhattan apartment until he outgrew it, obviously. And when the lady looked around the world to see the best place she could find for Boris to send him, she picked Chester Zoo right here. And it's quite remarkable that Boris didn't just manage to learn to be a chimp again, or for the first time, and to integrate into a big established group. He actually rose to the top, and he was the alpha male for a long time, which was when I first got to know him. We were born in the same year, Boris and me, but a lot has happened in our lifetime. When I was first studying Boris and his group almost 30 years ago, there were 175,000 critically endangered Western chimpanzees. That number's dwindled at a horrifying rate to just 35,000. An 80% drop in 30 years, which could be repeated in the next 30 years. I don't want to contemplate a world without chimpanzees, but we might only have one generation to do something about it. And of course, it's not just chimpanzees, it's everything, because everything's interconnected in nature. So the recent UN and WWF reports have highlighted how the planet's biodiversity has shrunk by a whopping and shocking 2/3 since 1970. An unprecedented rate of decline. And in that same lifetime, just our lifetime, the human population has more than doubled to 7.8 billion. That word unprecedented is used quite a lot at the moment in these COVID times. But maybe the anthropause that we've all been living through has given us a chance, given humans as a species a chance to start appreciating nature more, to start reconnecting or connecting with nature more, and to literally take stock of declining nature and think about and reflect on the impact that each has upon the other. Maybe this can act as a catalyst for change. So the message I want to give today is really very simple, that we as a human species need to find better ways to move forward in our existence, in our coexistence with other species in nature, in greener, wilder, and more respectful ways. So there are many examples of humans showing poor stewardship responsibilities towards nature, but also some success stories as well, which bring hope for the future. Without human interference, nature works. And a great example of this balancing selection in an ecosystem is in Yellowstone National Park. Wolves historically were demonized, persecuted, extirpated from here in the UK and from several places in the US, including Yellowstone. But the return of the wolf to Yellowstone in the early 90s was one of the best success stories in reintroductions. This is called a trophic cascade, and it shows how once the wolves came back, they rebalanced all the natural competitive predator-prey relationships. So elk had become overabundant in the park. They were being culled because they were eating all of the park vegetation, and there was nothing left really for the beavers and the smaller animals. But once wolves returned, they kept the herds at a balanced level, naturally. It's one of my favourite places, Yellowstone. But the irony is that it's a supervolcano. That's what makes it such a magical place, not just for the wildlife, but for the geothermal features like geysers and mud pots. But that's what will likely one day make it erupt with devastating consequences. However, that's not really something we can do anything about, but there is so much we can do. So we have broken our connection with nature, but we can fix it, and we can do things as individuals, we can do things collectively and put pressure on the people in power to make better decisions. So these are some of the ways that we're interfering with nature. So we're using the Earth's resources at an unsustainable rate. We're removing and changing land and the biodiversity. We're polluting the land, the air and the water. Fossil fuel companies, the ways that they make goods and how they're consumed by an ever-increasing massive human population. And it's worth pointing out, actually, that the more that humans come into direct contact with wild animals, the greater the risk of further emerging diseases, such as we're going through at the moment. human impact, especially on animals in places like fur farms and food markets, is huge, and those animals are caged. Caged animals are stressed animals, and stressed animals actually shed virus at higher rates. So in that way, we humans could be seen as drivers of these diseases. Now, when you think about different species in wildlife, they have differences in their vulnerability because they have differences in their resilience. And what you find is that not all species are equal because they have differences in their ability to adapt or to be flexible or to be plastic, as we call it. Tend to find that large mammals are more vulnerable. So mammals like chimpanzees, for instance, they have slower and later reproduction, longer interbirth intervals, and low population densities. However, thankfully, they have greater behavioural flexibility. So this is really good because they can adapt better to changing environments, such as, for instance, living on the borders of plantations. And when they do that, they actually change their social structure and their diet as well. So usually chimps have a fission fusion social structure, so they split off into small groups to forage for food and then they come back together again. They don't need to do that when they're exploiting this novel food source of a crop in a plantation, because they can do it all together. Of course, that crop raiding is likely to bring them into conflict with human farmers. Other charismatic megafauna, like elephants, they require so much water to drink every day, 40 to 80 gallons of water, that rising temperatures and droughts make them really vulnerable compared to, say, cheetahs, who can go for 3 to 4 days without needing to drink. Endangered green sea turtles are vulnerable because they lay their eggs in the sand, and the temperature of that sand dictates the sex of the baby turtles. Some species are being pushed onto what's called an escalator to extinction. So mountain birds in the Andes, for instance, are having to go higher and higher because of rising temperatures due to global warming. They're trying to find cooler habitats, but they've got nowhere else left to go. And as well as species differences at a species level, you have individual differences as well within species, and personality is an area that actually has great potential to help. It's sadly being used as a way to make decisions about culling animals as well. So deer, for instance, that come down too near the roads tend to be bolder individuals. So by culling the bolder individuals in the population, you can shift the population to become more shy. Then they're less likely to come down near the road, less likely to come into conflict with humans. These are the 3 responses, if you like, to human disturbance in the environment. Basically, they can relocate, animals cannot cope with change and die out, or they can do this adaptation. Now, the single greatest cause of destruction of habitats is conversion of land for cattle. So as you can see in this stark diagram here, just 4% of mammalian life on Earth is wild animals. The biggest percentage, 60%, is livestock, and 36% is humans. So humans and wild animals face direct harm and loss of habitat due to climate change. Hurricane Katrina in 2005 was one of the worst of all time. During that, we learned that dolphins actually are quite resilient. They maintained relatively stable personalities through a significant life event of having to be relocated when their sanctuary was destroyed by the hurricane. We're seeing huge increases in flooding and wildfires, notably in Australia recently, where billions of animals were killed, one of the worst wildlife disasters in modern history. Due to global warming, the permafrost in Siberia is melting, with huge holes opening up, threatening entire cities. And huge swathes of the Oregon coast were also on fire at unprecedented levels. It was off that Oregon coast in 2005 that I made my first unsuccessful attempt to see orcas. A few years later, in 2012, I was rewarded with a mesmerising image of a family pod appearing from the horizon off Vancouver Island. This spy hopper here might actually be a famous individual known as Granny, or J2 of the endangered southern resident population of the Pacific Northwest. Granny's not been seen for a while, so it's thought she might finally have died, but that would be about the age of 100. Orcas live as long as us or longer, and are one of the few species to go through menopause. Now, in humans, it's thought that females, post-reproductive females, help their kin, and that increases their inclusive fitness. And this grandmother effect has now been seen in orcas. So as well as sharing food with younger members of the pod and helping them to learn to hunt and to sing family songs. Grannies are especially important at times of food scarcity because they know where to find all the best food sources. So they're world experts in where salmon swim, when it's warm, when it's stormy, when the tides are changing. And to do that, they draw on their years of experience and their familiarity with their environment. But of course, when that environment is interfered with through global warming and rising sea temperatures, through overfishing, through pollution, and ship noise particularly that drowns out their sonar communication, these matriarchs of the ocean can't hone in on all the familiar cues, and the confusion that results could mean jeopardy for the survival of the whale pod. You actually find that young orcas who've lost their grandmother are 4.5 times more likely to die in the 2 years following her death than those who still have her. Now, during lockdown, we humans had an enforced opportunity to slow down. And once we did that, we started to notice things. Some new things we saw around us were not new, we just hadn't noticed them before. Some things were new because other species were making use of the peace and space. So people were seeing foxes and even stoats and moles in the daytime. Before lockdown, we knew that some species were changing their behaviour, their diets, their territory, space use, social behaviour. Other species changing their behaviour. That's an impressive thing, isn't it? And they're doing that largely because they have to adapt to anthropogenic disturbance. There's a fascinating body of research called HIREC, Human-Induced Rapid Environmental Change, and we're learning that animals are being forced into what's called microevolution. So, for example, songbirds, in response to noise and light pollution, they're singing more at night when there's less traffic, and they're also choosing to constrain their singing repertoire to sing at higher frequencies to be heard. Frogs use a gap-calling strategy as well. So I wonder, do you think we've come to appreciate nature more, appreciate our place in nature more? By feeling vulnerable to a virus we've no control over, do you think we appreciate our health more? Could these considerations extend more broadly and more fundamentally to thinking about the ways we coexist with other species in nature? I'm not sure if all the wildlife appreciated seeing so much of humankind, but this squirrel was very friendly looking through our window, and one of our cats was also spellbound. So we impact nature greatly, but we're also reliant on it. So we're reliant on it for pure survival value, for clean air, water, food, and 40% of plants are now known to be threatened with extinction, so that in itself threatens our air and water supply. But over and above the survival value nature has, it has so much more special value too. So as psychologists, we're learning more and more about all the ways that nature is good for us. So it increases our psychological well-being and our mood, and it lowers our blood pressure even, and certainly our stress and depression. And pets, the animals that we bring into our homes and covet, they can help greatly too. Pet therapy is used for going into hospitals with the elderly. Dogs in children's classrooms raises their empathy as well. And the rich relationships that we have with our pets are really valued too. So I wonder, are you a dog or a cat person, or maybe something else? How would you rank your love for your pet compared to your love for your human partner? Well, some research has actually shown that people can rate their pets more highly than their humans. I have to be balanced, however, and say that as well as us having to think about our own ecological footprints, there's now some research on the ecological pawprints of our companion animals, and of course their food, water, space, healthcare requirements, not to mention waste production, are not insignificant. So we can fix our broken connection with nature if we care enough to change. And it's really encouraging, I think, that the climate change movement's been gathering momentum recently. So just last week, the Prime Minister signed the Leaders' Pledge to protect 30% of land by 2030. But we need more. We need transformative action, and now, in order to save our web of life. So we need to demand that all politicians take action to use natural resources sustainably, transform these production and consumption norms, restrict chemicals that degrade the land, come up with some strategies for sharing space that can include some specific targeted interventions. For instance, we need wildlife corridors in the wild so that fragmented populations can be connected in order to move. And similarly, in urban settings, we can put up bridges where animals come into contact with humans in dangerous road situations. And we can also make decisions as individuals. So you might want to consider dietary change. I'm not going to advocate that everyone becomes a vegetarian or a vegan necessarily, but eating less meat can be good for health and good for the environment. Consider houses, cars, material possessions. One way everyone can help is by planting more trees, and that can help us reach the target of net zero by 2050. So you can go to WWF to find out some more ways that you can help. And you can share the message and raise awareness on social media and when you're talking to people. And I'd just like to end by repeating my call to action, and that's for us all to move forward in our coexistence in better ways, to not take over everything, to share in the responsibility to live greener, wilder, and more respectfully.